Sam loved his little house at the corner of Maple Street. It was not very big, but it had a wide front yard that caught the morning sun. When he bought the house, the yard was nothing more than dry soil with patches of weeds. Sam had a dream to change it into something green, full of life, and useful for his kitchen. Slowly, with patience, he turned the yard into a colorful garden. He planted rows of tomatoes that climbed up thin wooden stakes. Carrots grew in neat lines near the edge of the path. A small patch of lettuce stayed fresh under a shade cloth. Sam even grew herbs like mint and basil that filled the air with a sweet smell every evening. Butterflies danced over the flowers, and bees moved happily between the blossoms. Sam worked on the garden every day before going to work. He watered the plants with care, trimmed leaves, and pulled out weeds. Neighbors often stopped while walking their dogs and said how beautiful the garden looked. Some children in the street even came to help him pick strawberries. Sam felt proud, because the garden was not only food for him but joy for others too. But not everyone liked it. Across the street lived a woman named Helen. She was part of the Homeowners Association, the group that managed rules for the neighborhood. Helen was strict about lawns, fences, and paint colors. She liked neat green grass with no weeds, no toys outside, and no change that she did not approve. People in the area often called her a difficult neighbor behind her back, though they were careful not to say it to her face. Helen did not like Sam's garden. To her, the front yard should have been only grass, cut short and plain. Every time she walked by, she frowned at the rows of vegetables. She told others that the garden looked messy, even though many neighbors thought it looked beautiful. One morning, Sam prepared for a short trip to visit his parents in another town. Before leaving, he watered the garden and checked the soil one last time. His plants were healthy, the tomatoes were almost ready to harvest, and the flowers had started to bloom. He felt happy and calm as he closed his gate and drove away. During the days Sam was gone, Helen's eyes kept turning toward the garden. She did not like seeing vegetables in a front yard. She decided that if she wanted the neighborhood to look the way she thought it should, she had to act. So one afternoon, while Sam was away, Helen called a small group of helpers she sometimes used for yard work. They came with tools, gloves, and trash bags. Under her instruction, they started pulling up plants from the soil. Tomato vines that Sam had tied carefully were ripped out. Carrot tops were yanked and tossed aside. The lettuce patch was cleared, and the herbs were cut down. By the end of the day, the garden that Sam had worked on for months was gone. All that was left was bare soil and a few broken stems. Helen stood with her hands on her hips, feeling satisfied. She thought she had saved the neighborhood from what she called a messy sight. She even planned to send Sam a notice from the Homeowners Association to remind him about keeping his yard according to the rules. But what Helen did not know was that Sam's garden was more than a hobby. Sam had registered it under a new state program that encouraged people to grow their own food. The program gave tax credits and protection to residents who planted vegetable gardens, even in their front yards. Local officials supported it because it helped families, saved water compared to grass lawns, and gave children a chance to learn about farming. When Sam returned from his trip a few days later, he was excited to see his garden again. He parked his car, stepped out, and froze in shock. The yard looked empty, like a stranger's land. His plants were gone, his work was gone, and only soil remained. Sam felt his chest grow heavy, but then he noticed something else. Neighbors stood at the corners of the street, watching him. Some looked angry, some looked sad. One of them came forward and told Sam what happened. Helen had destroyed the garden while he was away. Sam listened quietly, his hands clenching by his sides. He felt hurt, but he also knew something Helen did not. He thanked the neighbor for telling him, then went inside his house to sit and think. He knew this was not just about plants. It was about respect, about rights, and about something bigger than one person's opinion. What Helen believed was a small victory was about to turn into a bigger problem for her. The state did not take kindly to anyone interfering with protected gardens. And very soon, Helen was going to learn that the law did not stand on her side this time. The next morning, Sam woke up feeling restless. He could not stop thinking about his garden. Every time he looked out the window, he remembered the green leaves, the red tomatoes, and the sweet smell of basil. He felt a deep sadness, but also a determination. Sam knew he could not change what happened, but he could find a way to make it right. Sam opened his laptop and searched for information about the state garden program. He read carefully through the rules. The program protected gardens that provided food for families and were registered officially. It specifically said that no one could destroy these gardens without permission from the owner and a proper warning. The moment Sam saw this, his heart lifted a little. He realized Helen had broken the rules and could face consequences. He decided to report the incident. Sam called the state office and explained everything. He told them how Helen had removed his plants while he was away. The officer on the phone listened patiently and told Sam that they would send someone to investigate. Sam felt a mix of relief and nervousness. He did not want trouble for Helen, but he wanted his rights respected and his garden protected. Meanwhile, Helen did not know that Sam had contacted the state. She was proud of herself. She had told other neighbors that she had fixed the yard and that Sam needed to learn about neighborhood rules. She even went further, writing a note to the homeowners association claiming she acted to maintain order. Helen believed she had nothing to worry about. A few days later, a letter arrived in the mail. Helen opened it quickly, expecting a small reminder from the HOA or a polite warning. Instead, her hands trembled as she read the words. The state had issued a fine. She had violated laws protecting registered gardens, and she was required to pay a penalty. The fine was significant, and the letter made it clear that any future interference could lead to more serious consequences. Helen froze. Her mind raced. She could not believe this had happened. She had thought she was doing the right thing by removing what she considered a messy garden. Now, she faced a legal and financial problem she had never expected. For the first time, Helen felt fear instead of control. Across the street, Sam tried to stay calm. He did not want to celebrate too soon. He knew that he could rebuild his garden, but he needed to plan carefully. He wanted to make sure it would be safe, protected, and respected. He began sketching a new layout on paper, deciding which vegetables and flowers to plant first. He wanted this garden to be even stronger than the last one. Neighbors started to notice changes. Some offered Sam leftover seeds, tools, and advice. Children came over, asking if they could help plant. One neighbor even brought a small watering can that had been unused for years. Sam felt encouraged. He realized that Helen's actions had backfired. Instead of stopping the garden, she had brought the neighborhood closer together. Helen, on the other hand, became cautious. She avoided Sam when she saw him in the street. She did not want to discuss the incident with anyone. Some neighbors, who had watched her destroy the garden, gave her cold looks. Even the children avoided her yard when passing by. For the first time, Helen felt isolated. Her actions, meant to show power, had caused her to lose respect from the people around her. Sam began preparing the soil for the new garden. He planted seeds carefully, making sure each row had enough space to grow. He put up small wooden signs with the names of the plants. Tomatoes, carrots, lettuce, herbs, and even sunflowers started to grow. Sam worked every morning before going to work, and every evening after returning. Slowly, life returned to the corner yard. One afternoon, a state officer came to check the garden. Sam welcomed them with a smile and showed how he had replanted everything. The officer nodded, impressed by the care Sam had taken. They noted that the garden was registered, safe, and in full compliance with the law. Sam felt a wave of pride. He realized that even though Helen had destroyed his first garden, he had built something stronger, better, and more protected this time. Helen watched quietly from her window. She could see the green leaves and colorful flowers growing again. She felt a mixture of anger and embarrassment. This time, she knew she could not interfere. Sam's garden was protected, the law was on his side, and the community supported him. Helen understood that her control over the street had ended. By evening, the sun set over Maple Street, shining gently on Sam's new garden. The tomatoes glowed red, the lettuce looked fresh, and the herbs released their pleasant smell into the air. Sam smiled as he walked along the path he had made. He knew challenges might come again, but he also knew he had learned something important. Patience, care, and respect could overcome unfairness. The garden was no longer just a collection of plants. It was a symbol of persistence, community, and justice. And for Helen, the fine in the mail would always remind her that rules were not for bending to personal wishes. As the days passed, Sam's garden continued to grow. The sunflowers reached toward the sky, their bright yellow faces smiling at everyone who walked by. Tomatoes ripened on the vine, and the herbs filled the air with a fresh, calming scent. Sam spent every free moment tending to the plants. He felt a deep connection to the life he had nurtured from seeds. The neighborhood began to take notice again. Children stopped to watch the vegetables grow, and neighbors often asked for advice on how to plant their own gardens. Sam shared seeds freely, teaching people how to start small plots in their yards. The community started to feel closer, and a sense of joy spread across Maple Street. Helen, however, could not hide her frustration. Every time she looked out her window, she saw Sam moving carefully between the rows of plants. She watched him water the vegetables, prune the tomato vines, and tie up the carrots as they grew taller. Helen felt powerless. Her previous attempts to control the yard had failed, and she could do nothing to stop the garden now. One afternoon, Helen decided to confront Sam. She walked across the street with her arms crossed, planning to lecture him on rules and order. Sam noticed her coming but stayed calm. He greeted her politely and asked if she needed help with anything. Helen started, her voice sharp. She told Sam that she did not like the garden and that it ruined the look of the street. Sam listened quietly and then explained the situation. He told her about the state garden program, the protections it provided, and the law that prevented anyone from removing a registered garden without permission. Helen's face changed as she listened. Her eyes widened, and she stopped speaking. Sam spoke gently, without anger, making it clear that he was not trying to start a fight. He was only explaining the truth. Helen realized that her previous actions had consequences, and she could no longer control what she wanted. A few neighbors had gathered to watch the conversation. They had seen Helen destroy Sam's first garden, and they now saw her standing silently while Sam explained the rules. Some of them whispered among themselves, proud that Sam had stayed calm and respectful. They admired how he had rebuilt the garden without anger, using patience and knowledge. After a few moments, Helen turned and walked back to her house. She did not speak to Sam again that day. For the first time, she felt the weight of her own choices. She understood that her actions had not only harmed the garden but also affected her reputation in the neighborhood. People no longer feared her opinions, and she had lost her sense of control. Meanwhile, Sam continued his work in the yard. He added new plants to the garden, including peppers, beans, and flowers that attracted more bees and butterflies. He built small wooden fences to protect certain plants from being accidentally stepped on. He even created a small corner for children to plant their own seeds and watch them grow. As the garden flourished, Sam began to receive letters and calls from neighbors asking for advice. Some wanted to learn about the state garden program, and others asked for help in starting their own vegetable patches. Sam realized that what started as a personal project had become a community effort. The garden was no longer just his, it belonged to everyone who shared in its growth. Helen watched quietly from her window again. She noticed how the street had changed. People were smiling, chatting, and working together. Even the children who had once played near Sam's garden were now learning and helping. Helen felt a mixture of frustration and envy. She realized that controlling the garden had not brought her satisfaction, but instead, it had built a stronger bond between Sam and the neighbors. One morning, Helen received another letter from the state. This time, it reminded her that any further interference with registered gardens could lead to more serious fines. Helen held the letter in her hands and sighed. She could no longer act freely, and the lesson was clear. Respecting others' rights was more important than enforcing her personal ideas. Sam, unaware of Helen's thoughts, smiled as he walked through his garden. The plants were tall, green, and healthy. Bees buzzed, birds sang, and the sun warmed the earth. He felt content, knowing that patience, care, and respect had overcome unfairness. That evening, Sam invited a few neighbors to his garden for a small gathering. They shared stories, exchanged seeds, and celebrated the growth of the plants. Laughter filled the air, and the garden seemed alive not just with vegetables and flowers, but with the happiness of people who cared for it. Helen watched from her window, quietly thinking about her actions. She understood that the garden could not be stopped, and perhaps it was better to accept that life in the neighborhood had changed. Sam's garden was now a symbol of community, patience, and respect. And for Helen, the state fine remained a reminder that rules could not be bent to personal wishes, and that fairness often outweighed control. Spring arrived on Maple Street, and Sam's garden was thriving more than ever. The tomatoes glowed red, the carrots had grown long and straight, and sunflowers reached high toward the morning sun. Bees buzzed happily, butterflies danced among the flowers, and the smell of herbs filled the air. Sam felt proud of how far the garden had come. Children loved spending time there, learning how to plant seeds and care for the soil. Neighbors came to ask questions and bring small gifts, like watering cans or extra seeds. Sam welcomed them all, teaching patiently and sharing advice. The garden had become a place for learning and laughter. Helen watched from her window with mixed feelings. She still felt frustrated that she could not control the yard, but she noticed something she had not expected. People who once ignored her now paid attention to Sam's garden. They smiled at him, talked to him, and shared small moments of kindness. Helen realized she had lost her influence in the neighborhood. Determined to regain some control, Helen called a few of her friends in the homeowners association. She explained that the garden was still messy and suggested holding a meeting to discuss stricter rules for front yards. Helen hoped this would intimidate Sam and force him to change his garden. Sam heard about the planned meeting from a neighbor. He felt a little nervous but knew he had done nothing wrong. He decided to attend and speak calmly, hoping to explain the importance of the garden to everyone in a fair way. The day of the meeting arrived. Several neighbors gathered in the community hall. Helen spoke first, arguing that front yards should look neat, like lawns, and that vegetable gardens created messy appearances. She suggested new rules that would make it difficult for anyone to plant food in the front yard. When it was Sam's turn, he stood and smiled politely. He explained that his garden was registered under the state program, and it followed all laws protecting residential gardens. He spoke about how the plants provided food for his family, taught children about nature, and helped the environment. Sam also mentioned how neighbors had joined in to learn and help, creating a stronger sense of community. Many people in the room nodded. Some quietly agreed with Sam, realizing that Helen's idea to limit gardens would prevent others from enjoying the same benefits. A few neighbors even spoke up, sharing how Sam's garden had inspired them to grow plants of their own. Helen's friends shifted uncomfortably, realizing that her strict ideas were not popular. Helen felt her face grow hot. She tried to argue, but Sam remained calm and confident. He spoke respectfully, giving examples and facts rather than raising his voice. The audience listened, and slowly, Helen's arguments lost power. The neighbors could see that Sam's garden brought joy, food, and knowledge, not harm. By the end of the meeting, the homeowners association decided not to implement new restrictions. Instead, they discussed ways to encourage more people to grow gardens safely, following state rules. Helen was left speechless. She realized that trying to control others had only caused problems for herself. After the meeting, Helen returned home quietly. She looked at Sam's garden from her window. The plants were bright and full of life. Children played near the edge, picking strawberries and learning to water the plants correctly. She could not deny that the garden had value, even if she did not like it personally. Sam continued to work in the yard. He added new rows of peppers, zucchini, and beans. He built small wooden markers with the names of the plants so children could learn and remember them. His garden was no longer just a project, it had become a place for the neighborhood to gather and share knowledge. One afternoon, a state officer visited the garden again. They checked the plants and spoke with Sam about his progress. The officer smiled, noting how well the garden was maintained. They reminded Sam that his garden remained protected under state law and encouraged him to continue teaching others. Sam felt proud and thankful. Helen watched quietly from her window. She could see neighbors stopping to admire the garden, exchanging stories, and laughing. She understood that her attempts to control the yard had failed, and the community had chosen to support Sam. The garden had become more than just a collection of vegetables and flowers. It was a symbol of patience, care, and fairness. Helen realized that she could either continue to resist or accept the change. Slowly, she began to understand that respect for others' efforts mattered more than control. As the sun set over Maple Street, the garden glowed warmly. Bees returned to their hives, children waved goodbye, and neighbors left with baskets of fresh vegetables. Sam stood in the middle of the yard, smiling as he looked at the rows of plants he had nurtured. The garden was thriving, the community was connected, and even Helen had learned a lesson about fairness, patience, and respect. Maple Street had changed, and it was clear that Sam's determination and kindness had made a lasting impact. Summer arrived, and Sam's garden was fuller than ever. The tomatoes hung heavy on the vines, the peppers glowed red and green, and the sunflowers reached higher than ever before. Butterflies visited every morning, and bees hummed happily from plant to plant. The garden had become a living treasure for the neighborhood. Children loved to help Sam. They watered the plants, pulled out weeds carefully, and learned how to plant seeds. Sam encouraged their curiosity, teaching them about how vegetables grew and why it was important to care for the earth. The small corner of Maple Street had become a place of learning, laughter, and growth. Helen, however, was not pleased. She still watched from her window, wondering how Sam could continue without any trouble. She felt frustrated that the neighbors had joined him and admired his efforts. Helen thought of new ways to regain control. She considered talking to the HOA again or finding some rule to challenge Sam. One morning, she decided to visit Sam directly. She knocked on his door, planning to pressure him into changing the garden. Sam opened the door and smiled politely. He asked Helen how he could help her. Helen began to speak, insisting that the garden should not be in the front yard. Sam listened carefully. He explained, once again, that his garden was registered under the state program. He spoke about the benefits it brought to the neighborhood, the food it provided, and the lessons children learned from it. Sam stayed calm and respectful, giving Helen clear facts without showing anger. Helen's frustration grew. She realized that Sam was prepared, organized, and patient. She could not find a way to convince him to remove or change the garden. The more she argued, the more obvious it became that the law and the community were on Sam's side. As Helen left, Sam thought about how much the garden had grown. He decided it was time to add a new feature, a small bench under the shade of a tree, where neighbors and children could sit and enjoy the flowers and vegetables. Sam also planned a small notice board, showing the names of the plants and simple tips for caring for them. This way, the garden could teach even more people and involve the community further. Neighbors noticed these changes immediately. They helped Sam carry small pieces of wood for the bench, painted the board with cheerful colors, and even brought extra plants to add to the garden. Children decorated the area with painted rocks and small signs with plant names. The garden became more beautiful and welcoming than ever. Helen continued to watch quietly from her window. She noticed that her attempts to stop the garden had not worked. Instead, her actions had encouraged Sam to make the garden even stronger. She realized that she could not fight the community's support. Sam had turned a difficult situation into an opportunity for growth, learning, and friendship. One afternoon, a local journalist visited the neighborhood. She had heard about Sam's garden and wanted to write a story for the community newspaper. Sam welcomed her warmly, showing her every part of the garden and explaining how it had grown from nothing into a source of learning and joy. The journalist took photos, interviewed children, and spoke with neighbors who shared how the garden had inspired them to start their own small plots at home. The article appeared in the next week's newspaper, showing Sam's garden in all its glory. It highlighted how he had handled Helen's interference calmly and respectfully, and how the community had come together to support him. Sam's story became an example of patience, care, and the importance of protecting what was right. Helen read the article and felt a strange mix of emotions. She was frustrated that she could no longer stop the garden, but she also felt some understanding that Sam had created something valuable. Slowly, she began to realize that respect and fairness were more important than control. Sam, on the other hand, continued his work. He planted more herbs, expanded the vegetable rows, and created small pockets of flowers to attract bees and butterflies. He knew that each seed represented patience and care, and that nurturing life could teach lessons that rules could not. By evening, the garden was quiet and peaceful. The sun set, casting a warm glow on the tomatoes, peppers, and sunflowers. Children waved goodbye, neighbors exchanged smiles, and Sam stood in the middle of the garden, feeling proud of what he had achieved. The garden had grown beyond a personal project. It had become a symbol of patience, respect, and community. Helen had learned that trying to control others could not stop something meaningful from growing. And for the neighbors, Maple Street had become a place of learning, friendship, and beauty, all because one person had refused to give up on what was right. Summer slowly turned into early fall, and Sam's garden was at its peak. The vegetables were ripe, flowers bright, and the herbs filled the air with a pleasant fragrance. The small bench under the tree became a favorite spot for children to sit and read or watch the bees move from flower to flower. Neighbors often stopped to admire the garden, bringing small gifts of seeds or tools. Maple Street had never felt so alive. Helen still watched from her window. She could see the smiles on neighbors' faces, the children laughing as they learned, and Sam quietly caring for the plants. She could not believe how much support he had. The garden had grown stronger despite her earlier interference, and the law protected it. Helen realized she could no longer influence what happened there. Then, one morning, a notice arrived in Helen's mailbox. It was from the state office that managed the garden program. The letter explained that Helen's actions in removing Sam's first garden had been a violation of the law. The fine had been confirmed, and she was required to pay it. The letter also explained that future interference could result in stricter consequences. Helen held the letter with shaking hands. She had never expected such a response. For the first time, she felt truly anxious. Her attempts to control the yard had brought her trouble rather than satisfaction. She realized that rules existed to protect fairness and that breaking them could not be ignored. Meanwhile, Sam continued to work peacefully in his garden. He added new rows of carrots, beans, and small flowers to attract more pollinators. he built another small area where children could plant seeds and learn about gardening. The garden was now not just a collection of vegetables, but a place for learning, sharing, and enjoying life. Neighbors noticed that Helen had not left her house much since receiving the notice. Some whispered that she seemed embarrassed by her actions. Children, who had once avoided her yard, now ran past with laughter and excitement. The contrast between Helen's unhappiness and the joy of Sam's garden was clear to everyone on the street. One afternoon, the state officer who had visited Sam before returned for a routine check. They walked through the garden, inspecting the plants and the learning area. Sam explained how he had replanted everything carefully and involved neighbors in helping maintain it. The officer smiled and praised Sam for his dedication, patience, and knowledge. They also reminded him that the garden remained fully protected under the state program. Helen watched quietly from her window as the officer left with Sam. She could not ignore the respect and recognition Sam had received. For the first time, Helen began to think about her own behavior. She realized that her attempts to control others had caused frustration and conflict, while Sam's patience and respect had created something lasting and meaningful. Over the next few weeks, Sam's garden continued to thrive. Tomatoes turned bright red, peppers glowed, and flowers bloomed in a variety of colors. Children planted their own small patches and learned to care for them. Neighbors brought extra seeds and tools to help. The garden had grown beyond what Sam had imagined. It had become a center of the community. Helen's fine arrived shortly after the notice. She had no choice but to pay it. It was a clear message that rules could not be ignored and that interfering with someone else's efforts could have real consequences. Helen paid the fine quietly and began to reflect on her actions. Slowly, she realized that the best way to live in the neighborhood was not through control but through respect and cooperation. Sam, unaware of the full thoughts going through Helen's mind, continued his work. He harvested ripe vegetables, shared them with neighbors, and taught children how to cook simple meals with fresh produce. Every day, the garden became more vibrant, more full of life, and more appreciated by everyone on Maple Street. By evening, the sun set over the street, casting a warm glow over the garden. Bees returned to their hives, birds sang their final songs for the day, and children waved goodbye as they left. Sam sat on the bench, looking over the rows of plants he had nurtured. He felt proud and content. The garden had survived challenges, grown stronger, and become a symbol of patience, fairness, and community. Helen watched from her window one last time before heading inside. She knew she could no longer fight against what the community had embraced. Sam's garden had won not just because of plants and soil, but because of kindness, respect, and determination. She understood that fairness could not be ignored, and that trying to control others only brought trouble. Maple Street had changed forever. Sam's garden was now a permanent symbol of what could happen when patience, care, and respect guided actions. Helen had learned her lesson, the neighbors were connected, and the garden continued to grow, stronger and more beautiful with each passing day. Autumn arrived on Maple Street, and Sam's garden was alive with color. The tomatoes had turned a deep red, pumpkins began to appear among the vines, and the sunflowers had grown tall and proud. Even the herbs looked full and fragrant. Sam walked through the garden every morning, checking the plants, watering them carefully, and encouraging the children who came to help. The neighborhood had changed since Sam first started his garden. Neighbors stopped to chat, share seeds, and exchange tips about planting. Children laughed as they learned to care for the plants. The garden had become more than a collection of vegetables and flowers, it was a place where the community came together. Helen watched quietly from her window. She no longer felt the urge to interfere. She had paid her fine, received her lesson, and realized that trying to control others only brought trouble. She saw how the neighborhood supported Sam and how the garden brought joy to everyone. Slowly, Helen began to feel a small sense of respect for what he had achieved. One crisp morning, Helen decided to step outside. She approached Sam cautiously, unsure how he would respond. Sam noticed her and smiled politely, offering a greeting. Helen took a deep breath and thanked Sam for his patience and for showing her the importance of respecting others' efforts. Sam nodded and welcomed her to take a look at the garden. Helen walked through the rows of plants and saw the care and dedication in every corner. She noticed the wooden markers with plant names, the small bench for children, and the little teaching corner that Sam had created. Helen could not deny that it was a beautiful and meaningful space. She felt a sense of humility and realized that Sam's calmness and patience had taught her a valuable lesson. The children noticed Helen walking through the garden and waved. She smiled awkwardly but genuinely. Sam encouraged her to try planting a small patch herself. Helen hesitated but finally agreed. Together, they planted a few marigolds near the edge of the garden. It was a small gesture, but it marked a new beginning for her. Neighbors passing by noticed Helen helping in the garden. They exchanged surprised but approving smiles. Some whispered that change was possible, even for someone who had once been difficult. Helen felt the warmth of the community for the first time, realizing that cooperation brought far more satisfaction than control ever could. Sam continued to teach the children about gardening. He showed them how to care for vegetables, how to water properly, and how to observe the plants for growth. He shared stories about patience and respect, explaining that just as plants need time to grow, relationships and trust required care and attention. The children listened carefully, their eyes wide with curiosity and admiration. Helen began to visit the garden more often. She helped with watering, learned about the different vegetables, and even started planting flowers along the path. Slowly, her attitude shifted. She found satisfaction in helping rather than controlling. The neighborhood noticed the change and welcomed her participation. As weeks passed, Maple Street became even more vibrant. Sam's garden was flourishing, and so was the community spirit. Neighbors worked together, children learned and played, and Helen had found a place where she could belong without trying to dominate. The garden had become a symbol of patience, fairness, and cooperation. One evening, the sun set over Maple Street, casting a warm golden light over the garden. Sam stood on the small bench, looking out at the rows of vegetables, flowers, and herbs. Children waved goodbye as they left, and neighbors nodded with smiles of appreciation. Helen stood nearby, quietly tending to a small patch of marigolds, feeling a sense of belonging she had never felt before. Sam knew that the garden's true success was not just in the plants, but in the way it had brought people together. It had taught lessons about respect, patience, and the value of working together. Helen had learned that trying to control others brought only trouble, while cooperation and understanding created something lasting. The garden continued to grow, year after year, becoming a permanent feature of Maple Street. It remained a place of learning, joy, and connection. Sam's careful work and patience had created more than just vegetables, it had created a community. Helen had changed, neighbors had come closer, and children had learned valuable lessons about caring for life and respecting others. The garden was no longer just Sam's, it belonged to the whole neighborhood, a living symbol of fairness, persistence, and harmony. As the cool autumn breeze blew through the leaves, Sam smiled, knowing that what had started as a simple dream had grown into something far greater than he had ever imagined. The garden was proof that patience, respect, and kindness could overcome unfairness and bring people together. Maple Street had been transformed, and everyone who lived there had learned a simple but powerful truth: growing something good took care, patience, and respect, and the rewards were far greater than anyone could have expected.